At 74, Evelyn wakes before the sun, humming as she folds fresh towels, her orchid blooming on the windowsill. Once widowed, once uncertain, she now begins each day with grace, daily walks, evening poetry readings, and that quiet confidence that only comes from surviving storms. But even women like Evelyn, bright-eyed, joyful, thriving, must listen closely to the quiet signals their bodies whisper, because sometimes the first warning doesn't shout, it shows up in the bathroom mirror. Let's begin with the habit most seniors overlook. 1. Ignoring sudden changes in skin color or texture, bruising, pale patches, redness. Evelyn had always been attentive, the kind of woman who folded her towels in thirds and noticed when a teaspoon went missing from the drawer. So when her morning routine, sunlight, soap, soft humming, led her to catch a glimpse of the faint yellowing on her upper arms, she paused. It wasn't a bruise, not quite, but something in the way the skin looked just slightly thinner, a little more marbled, pulled her from habit into concern. She had never been the type to panic, but this was different, not painful, not dramatic, just off. She moved her hand under the running water, rotating it slowly, watching light scatter across her wrist. There was a faint purpling on the underside she hadn't noticed before. It looked like dusk, or like the sky before it rains. Evelyn, like many women her age, had made peace with the changes time brings, the softened neck, the silvery hair, the way energy crept into her mornings, like honey instead of striking like lightning. But this didn't feel like time. It felt like a whisper, and one worth listening to. She didn't tell anyone, not at first. What would she even say? My arms look cloudy, but deep down something stirred. She remembered an article from years ago about skin changes signaling circulation issues, and though she didn't want to believe anything serious could be blooming beneath her skin, she also knew what it meant to ignore signs, to delay care, to pretend that silence equals safety. Just 5 years earlier, Evelyn was in a different place altogether. Her husband had passed, her calendar was empty, and the bathroom mirror had become less a place of reflection and more a site of detachment. She'd rush past it, toss her robe on the hook, and avoid eye contact with the woman who stared back. There was too much weight in those mornings, grief, loneliness, and that vague sense of becoming invisible. Back then, if she had noticed a bruise, she would have brushed it off as bumping into the counter. A rash? Maybe new detergent. She didn't want to feel fragile, and she certainly didn't want to become one of those women who ran to the doctor over every new dot or discoloration. Aging felt like a slow unraveling, and she wasn't sure how, or if she wanted to hold the thread. It wasn't until a neighbor, Joyce, mentioned that her own skin changes had led to a diagnosis of low platelet count that Evelyn started to shift her mindset. Joyce had caught it early, just from noticing how easily her arms bruised. Evelyn had nodded politely when she heard the story, but that night, she lingered longer in the mirror. She pressed gently on her forearms, watching the skin respond, and whispered, "Noted." That was the beginning, not of panic, but of permission. Permission to look, to pay attention, to believe that awareness wasn't worry, it was wisdom. From that moment on, Evelyn began to see her bathroom not just as a space for washing and routine, but as an early warning post. A place where truth could rise quietly, if she was willing to meet it. Evelyn started making a small change each morning. Before brushing her teeth, before stepping into the shower, she took 60 seconds, just 1 minute, to check her skin. Arms, legs, face, hands. No judgments, just curiosity. She looked for shifts. Was anything paler than usual? Were her fingertips pink and warm, or dusky and cold? Was that new spot just a freckle, or something deeper? At first, she felt silly. It reminded her of checking her children for rashes when they were little. But that small act became a grounding ritual, one that tethered her to her body with tenderness instead of fear. And eventually it became second nature. One morning, months after she'd started, she did notice something new, a cluster of small red spots on her shin. They weren't itchy or raised, but they were unusual. Because she had practiced awareness without panic, she simply made a note, took a photo, and brought it up at her next checkup. Her doctor raised his brows slightly. "Good catch," he said. "We'll run a quick test." It turned out to be nothing serious, just a temporary reaction to a new supplement, but Evelyn didn't feel foolish for asking. She felt powerful, engaged, like someone who didn't just age passively, but showed up to her own health with eyes wide open. This habit, this single minute, rippled into other parts of her life. She felt more present during her walks, more curious about what her body told her. And on difficult days, when old sadness crept in, she used that moment of skin checking as a reminder. I'm still here, I'm still learning, and I deserve care. 2. Overlooking changes in bowel or urine patterns, color, frequency, odor. Evelyn's decision to pay attention to her skin marked a quiet turning point. She had gone from avoiding the mirror to embracing it, not as a critic but as a companion. That 1-minute daily check-in, once awkward, had given her confidence, not because it made everything perfect, but because it made her present. She felt more rooted in her body, more trusting of its signals. That sense of grounded awareness naturally began spilling into other parts of her routine, especially the parts most people avoided talking about. It started with her noticing how often she was flushing the toilet. Not something she counted, of course, but a vague sense that things weren't as regular, or as familiar as they once were. Some mornings she noticed her urine was a dark amber, even though she was drinking tea and water like usual. Other days the color seemed unusually pale, almost translucent. And once or twice, there had been a faint, unfamiliar odor, nothing alarming, just different. Evelyn hesitated to bring it up. These weren't topics for polite conversation. She had been raised to treat bowel talk as private, even shameful. But the shift in her mindset, the one that began with that quiet mirror moment, nudged her toward honesty, not just with others, but with herself. So she began to quietly observe, without judgment. Was she urinating more at night? Did she feel the same energy after using the bathroom, or was there an odd fatigue that followed? She kept a small notepad in the drawer, not to obsess, but to track subtle changes over time. This habit began with simple awareness, but quickly became a source of clarity. One morning, after noticing a distinctly cloudy appearance in her urine, she scheduled a call with her doctor, not out of panic, but out of partnership with her body. Her physician ordered a few routine tests, and while everything came back within normal ranges, he praised her for noticing. "Most people your age ignore these changes," he said, "and they only speak up when it's far more serious." That acknowledgement planted something deeper in Evelyn, the realization that her bathroom habits weren't just routine, they were messages, small data points in the larger story of her health. Noticing them wasn't overreacting, it was responding. Looking back, Evelyn could remember a time, not that long ago, when she would have gone months without giving a single thought to her bathroom routine. Her flushes were automatic, her departures rushed. She barely glanced at what went into the bowl. It was as though once the door shut behind her, everything that happened inside didn't count. It wasn't real life. It was private, messy, and better left ignored. That detachment had roots, deep ones. A lifetime of not discussing what the body does behind closed doors. Messages absorbed over decades. Be neat, be quiet, be invisible. Aging didn't change that. If anything, it deepened it. After all, who wants to admit they're using the bathroom more often at night, or that something smells off? Even among friends, it wasn't something easily shared. But Evelyn had already started to change that inner dialogue. She'd learned to view her body's changes with curiosity instead of criticism. So when her bathroom habits began shifting, she approached them not as shameful failures, but as signs worth understanding. She learned that darker urine, especially first thing in the morning, could signal dehydration or kidney strain. That strong odors, while sometimes harmless, could also hint at dietary imbalances or infection, and that bowel habits, yes, even the quiet ones, had stories to tell. A sudden change in frequency, a long stretch of constipation, a new soft irregularity, each one was a clue. Evelyn didn't become obsessed. She didn't live in fear. She simply became a witness, a partner, a participant in her own well-being. Over time, this attention carried into her emotional space. She began to recognize how closely her bathroom habits mirrored her emotional ones. On days when she was anxious or emotionally overwhelmed, she noticed her digestion was different. On days filled with calm connection and gentle movement, her body responded in kind. It was as if her body had been speaking all along, and she was finally fluent in its language. She shared her experience, not widely, but intentionally, with her daughter when they talked about doctor visits, with her walking partner, who admitted she'd been waking up 3 times a night to urinate and hadn't told anyone. And each time, Evelyn didn't preach or instruct. She simply reflected, "I've started noticing, and it's helped me feel more in control." That shift from secrecy to sovereignty became one of the most powerful changes in Evelyn's golden years. It didn't come from a dramatic diagnosis. It came from looking where she'd once looked away. Building on the clarity gained from noticing internal changes, Evelyn's self-awareness began to ripple outward. What had started with mindful mirror moments and quiet attention to the body's rhythms was now becoming a way of life, attuned, grounded, present. But transformation isn't always loud. Sometimes it reveals itself in quiet avoidance, and Evelyn didn't notice this next change right away. At first she simply found herself saying, "I'll shower later." A morning stretched into noon, a day into 2. Her favorite lavender soap sat untouched. Towels stayed folded. She wasn't avoiding cleanliness, she told herself, just pacing herself. But when she caught her reflection one morning, and couldn't remember the last time she'd washed her hair, something stirred. This wasn't like her. Evelyn had always found comfort in the routine of grooming, combing out her curls, rubbing lotion into her arms, pressing warm water to her face. Those rituals were more than hygiene. They were part of how she re-entered herself each morning. But now days slipped by, in a haze of comfortable inertia. It wasn't until her daughter gently asked if everything was okay that Evelyn paused. "You always loved your morning showers," she'd said. "Is it harder now?" That question, spoken without judgment, echoed in her. Is it harder now? Evelyn realized the answer wasn't physical. It was emotional. The stillness of the house, the quiet, the shift from structured days to wide open ones, had left her without anchors. The shower, once a moment of pause, now felt like a task. And that small internal reluctance had taken root quietly. But because she'd been practicing awareness, she recognized it for what it was, not laziness, not failure, but a sign, a subtle nudge to reclaim a part of herself she'd slowly let slip away. As Evelyn's presence deepened, and her attentiveness grew, she began to notice something else, something subtler than the skipped showers, but no less telling. Her time in the bathroom had stretched, not dramatically, but noticeably. Where once her routine had been efficient and light, she now lingered, sometimes sitting long after she was done, as if the quiet space gave her something the rest of the house didn't. She didn't dread the toilet. It wasn't discomfort. It was detachment. She would sit, elbows on knees, hands clasped, staring at the floor tiles. She told herself it was a rest, a break. And in some ways it was. But over time she realized the habit had taken on a weight of its own. Some days her legs would feel slightly numb when she stood. Other times, she noticed the pressure in her lower back from sitting too long. And occasionally she found herself losing track of time. 15 minutes gone, in the soft hum of the fan, the gentle echo of her own breath. It wasn't until a magazine article caught her eye, something about prolonged bathroom sitting, and its connection to circulation and posture strain, that Evelyn felt the familiar tap on her awareness. She wasn't doing anything wrong, but she wasn't really present, either. The toilet had become a pause button, a place where she could sit without expectation, where no one asked her to move faster, speak louder, or show up more cheerfully. But she began to question whether the comfort was helping or holding her in place. And so, without judgment, she started to track it. How long was she staying? What drew her to linger? Could she give herself that same stillness somewhere else? In a garden chair, at the window with tea in hand, These weren't sweeping changes, but they were honest ones, and honesty had become her quiet revolution. Evelyn's journey had never been about perfecting herself. It was about returning to herself. As she tuned in to skipped showers and long toilets, she saw a common thread: disconnection, not just from her body, but from her sense of rhythm. Aging had brought space, space had brought stillness, and stillness at times had turned into stagnation. But with each small act of noticing, Evelyn reconnected with her inner tempo. She reinstated her lavender soap, not as a chore, but as a morning ceremony. She turned on soft music, opened the window a crack, and let the warm water draw her back into herself. It wasn't about being clean, it was about being here. She also shifted her posture in the bathroom, literally. She placed a small stool near the sink, so she could sit and breathe before or after, not just during. She added a timer, not to rush herself, but to bring gentle awareness. 5 minutes was often enough. These weren't drastic changes, but for Evelyn they were acts of return, habits that anchored her again in the present moment, in the truth of her body, and in the quiet joy of simply being awake to her own experience. And as her routines grew more intentional, so did her outlook. She smiled more during phone calls. Her garden began to bloom again, and though no one else might have noticed the shift, she did. Because for Evelyn, reclaiming her bathroom rituals wasn't just hygiene, it was healing. 3. Leaving the bathroom in disarray without noticing. With so much already achieved, clarity in observation, reclaiming hygiene rituals, and a deepened connection to self, Evelyn found herself more emotionally centered than she had been in years. Her routines now reflected care, not obligation, but as she grew more present, a new layer of insight began to unfold, one not centered on her body, but her environment. One rainy afternoon, Evelyn stepped into her bathroom and paused. It wasn't messy, exactly, but it wasn't peaceful either. A damp towel slouched over the counter. Her robe was crumpled near the door. The hand lotion was uncapped, slightly sticky. It had crept up on her, this subtle disarray. One small skip here, one delayed task there. She hadn't noticed it becoming a pattern. This was the same woman who once arranged soaps by scent, who took pride in her orchid's bloom on the sill. The clutter wasn't intentional, but it was revealing. She began to observe: when did she leave things undone? When was she most likely to let a mess linger? Patterns emerged. On days when her mind felt scattered or heavy, when grief resurfaced in subtle waves, when time seemed to slow, not in rest, but in absence. The bathroom, it turned out, reflected her state of mind more honestly than any journal entry. The awareness wasn't shameful, it was clarifying. Evelyn realized that the environment she moved through carried emotional fingerprints. The towel on the counter wasn't laziness, it was a signpost, one that pointed toward mental fatigue, emotional clutter, or even loneliness. Her physical space had started to mirror her inner one, and with this realization came a quiet shift. If the bathroom could reflect her mood, maybe it could also help recalibrate it. 4. Restoring order as a form of healing. Once Evelyn recognized the emotional tone her bathroom carried, she began to make gentle changes, not for guests, not for perfection, but for herself. Her first shift was simple. She placed a small basket near the door for her robe. Then she tucked a lavender sachet into her towel drawer, creating a sense of care in the smallest gestures. The mirror, once foggy with inattention, she began to wipe down weekly, not as a chore but as a ritual. She began asking herself, what do I want to feel in here? Not what others would see, but what she would feel. Peace, clarity, groundedness. So she let that intention guide her choices. Even the placement of her items changed. She moved her most used items within reach, and let go of products she no longer loved. There was a softness to this process, not the sternness of a spring cleaning frenzy, but the grace of emotional tidying. Each object had its place, and in that act, Evelyn found herself creating space, not just in drawers but in her mind. What surprised her most wasn't how quickly she restored order, it was how much lighter she felt afterward. The mental fog she hadn't even realized had gathered started to lift. She felt more capable, more in rhythm with herself. It wasn't about the towel or the soap or the mirror. It was about the message she sent herself each time she cared for her space. You matter, your peace matters, your presence is worth preserving. And the ripple didn't stop at the bathroom door. She noticed herself moving through her home with more attention, lighting a candle before journaling, wiping the counter after tea. These tiny acts weren't just practical, they were grounding. They brought her back to the moment, to herself, to the quiet power of being intentional. By this stage in her journey, Evelyn had reclaimed far more than just a room. She had restored her relationship with her body, her rhythms, and now, her environment. And as the clutter receded, something else rose: clarity. She realized that the bathroom, in all its quiet privacy, had become a map of her emotional health. What once was a place of avoidance had become a mirror, a sanctuary. And every habit she cultivated there, watching for skin changes, noticing patterns in bathroom use, honoring the flow of hygiene and rest, was now tied together by the physical space she moved through each day. What she saw now, when she entered, was not just a room, but a reflection, a physical affirmation of her care, her awareness, and her growth. And with that came peace. Not perfection, but peace, because Evelyn knew she would still have quiet days, days of low energy, days when a towel might stay where it fell. But now, those moments wouldn't be ignored, they'd be acknowledged, seen, met with grace. This transformation didn't arrive all at once. It came in pauses, in small realizations, in tiny actions done with love. And with every act, Evelyn found a bit more of herself. The woman who once felt unseen, now felt surrounded by signs of her own care. The bathroom had never asked for praise, but now, it gave her something in return. A daily reminder that growth isn't loud, and healing isn't always visible. Sometimes, it's found in the folded towel, the clear mirror, the quiet joy of noticing the difference between disorder and invitation. And Evelyn, standing barefoot on cool tile, no longer overlooked what she once ignored. She had returned home to herself. 5. Needing the bathroom frequently at night, but never mentioning it. As her transformation neared its peak, Evelyn could look back and see the quiet revolution she had sparked through awareness, reflection, and emotional honesty. Each habit once overlooked had given her new footing. With the mirror as her ally and her routines as gentle rituals, Evelyn had re-entered a relationship with her body and her space. But one last habit remained, one that stayed hidden in the shadows of night. It had been happening for months. Evelyn would wake just past 2 in the morning, then again closer to 4. She'd rise quietly, careful not to wake her cat, and shuffle to the bathroom in the dark. It had become so routine, she barely registered it as strange. It's just age, she told herself. Everyone gets up once or twice. But there was a hesitation under her reasoning. She hadn't mentioned it to her doctor, not during her last checkup, not even in passing. It seemed too small to bring up, too ordinary to count as concern. And yet, the broken sleep was leaving her groggy. Her balance felt off in the morning. And some nights, she found herself wide awake long after returning to bed, thoughts circling like crows. Evelyn began tracking the pattern, not obsessively, just noting how many nights per week, how soon before sleep returned. Was she drinking too late? Was there something else beneath the surface? She didn't want this habit to define her, but once again, awareness became her entry point, not into fear, but into clarity. She remembered what her doctor had once said: frequency can mean a lot of things, but silence never helps us understand. And so Evelyn prepared to speak, not because the night visits scared her, but because pretending they didn't matter had started to weigh more than the truth. The nighttime bathroom visits stirred something deeper in Evelyn, an echo of old silences, not just the unspoken concerns about aging, but the deeply embedded habit of not wanting to make a fuss. Even now, after all she had uncovered, this final habit reminded her how easy it was to slip back into patterns of minimization. But Evelyn had changed, slowly, softly, with every towel refolded, every mirror wiped, every observation honored without fear. So instead of dismissing the nighttime visits, she decided to frame them differently, not as intrusions, but as invitations. They were reminders that her body, even in stillness, was still speaking, still asking for care. She adjusted her evening routine, not with the goal of fixing the habit, but of meeting it with grace. She dimmed the lights earlier, kept a journal by her bed, and began treating her body's signals like nighttime visitors, not interruptions, but guests bearing quiet messages. One night, after her usual 2 a.m. trip, she lingered near the sink. She looked into the dark window, seeing only a soft reflection of herself in the glass. There was no urgency, no frustration, just presence. In that moment, Evelyn recognized that the final layer of her transformation wasn't about controlling her body, but listening to it, even in the hours no one sees, even in moments too quiet for words. And just like that, something shifted. The habit didn't disappear, but its meaning changed. It became part of her relationship with herself, a new dimension in the ongoing dialogue between awareness and acceptance. By the end of her transformation, Evelyn could trace each habit like a constellation. They didn't shine alone, they made sense in connection. From noticing her skin, to reclaiming the meaning behind disarray, from morning rituals to midnight moments, each one had revealed a part of her life that asked not to be fixed, but to be honored. These weren't medical routines, they were reflections of the self, physical touch points, for emotional truths. And as Evelyn stood at her bathroom sink, one quiet morning, brushing her hair in slow, steady strokes, she didn't feel accomplished. She felt whole. She had not erased all discomfort. She had not solved every mystery, but she had returned to her body with love. And in doing so, she had created a path that others could walk too, not as a strict set of rules, but as a guide to coming home to oneself. Evelyn's habits became markers, not mandates, evidence that growth can start anywhere, even with something as ordinary as flushing the toilet, noticing a towel, or waking in the night. What mattered was not the habit itself, but the care it invited. And as the light shifted through the frosted window that day, Evelyn smiled, not because the journey was over, but because she now knew how to stay on it, with gentleness, with attention, and always, always, with the belief that no signal from the bowl is ever too small to honor. Evelyn's journey began with quiet noticing, and led to powerful self-trust. These simple habits became her guideposts, not her limits. You too can listen, reflect, and reclaim your peace, one small choice at a time. Your body is speaking, your story is unfolding, and it's never too late to thrive.